All right, 2 Peter chapter 2. So if everybody remembers, chapter 1 was talking about the key to chapter 1 is the sure word of prophecy. Even though what Peter had seen, eyewitness of Christ with Moses and Elijah, he says that they have a more sure word, right? So even eyewitness accounts, God's word stands and is truth is even more sure than what they were seeing. Right? So then when you get into chapter 2, Peter's going to start talking about the false prophets. Okay? Remember last time we talked a little bit about the false prophets, some of the things they were going to say. So we'll kind of recap on that. And then Peter's going to mention a couple of individuals throughout this, chapter 2, primarily Lot and Balaam. So today we'll try to get through talking about Lot, and then the next time we'll try to get through talking about Balaam. There's two individuals here that he lists. Alright, so let's look at verse 1, and I apologize in advance, there's going to be a lot of reading tonight, because we got to get the context in. Emily looks down with a sigh. So anyways, 2 Peter 2 verse 1 says, "But there were false prophets also among the people, even as there shall be false teachers among you, who privily shall bring in damnable heresies, even denying the Lord that bought them, and bring upon themselves swift destruction. And many shall follow their pernicious ways, by reason of whom the way of truth shall be evil spoken of. And through covetousness shall they with vain words make merchandise of you, whose judgment now of a long time lingereth not, and their damnation slumbereth not." Right? We'll stop there for now. So Peter said, just like in time past, there were false prophets among the people, there's going to be false teachers among you. Right? We talked about all that. I won't really go over a ton, but remember, he says that privily, we talked about that, they crept in unawares according to the book of Jude, because Jude kind of mirrors what Jude says, 2 Peter it mirrors each other. So remember, we talked about that when Christ talked about the wolf wearing sheep's clothing. And so specifically they are acting like members of a little flock. Little flock, sheep, kind of interesting how, so there. And then we talked in 1 John, First John's going to list some things that they can see. It's going to be kind of like tests to see whether they are actually members or if they're imposters. And we talked about some of those. So first and foremost, if they deny that Christ has come, they're obviously not going to be a member, right? But there's going to be these that are creeping in, that are eating with them. It talks about eating and all that stuff. And so they're going to be close, but these individuals are going to be spreading heresies. Christ has not come. The guy that's out in the desert, or the guy that's in the secret chamber, remember we read that in the gospel? That's the Christ. No, that's not. Christ warns them about that in the Gospels, right? So, one of those things is going to be denying that he's come in the flesh, or denying that Jesus was the Christ. Saying, well, he was a good person, but he wasn't the Messiah. The Messiah is the guy that set himself up in the temple now, or is that guy out here, right? So, on top of that, we read there in Revelation and a couple other places, what are these individuals going to be able to do? They're going to be able to perform these signs and wonders, right? Okay? So, signs and wonders. So you've got signs and wonders on this side that look good, and you've got the sure word. Which one are you going to go with? Right? The sure word, right? So, they're going to be able to deceive people because they're going to be able to do these things that are miraculous, right? And it's all going to be in the name of a heresy, pretty much. So, now notice in verse 1, it's interesting. Here he says that they bring in damnable heresies, even denying the Lord that bought them. So, it's interesting because it talks about God buying them in time past. Okay, so we're going to look at a couple of those passages, but ultimately, how did he buy them? What did Christ do for them? He died for them, right? He died on the cross. We understand in Hebrews, right, that he shed his blood and all of that for them.
Kinsman Redeemer.
Right, the kinsman redeemer. So, now look at Exodus chapter 15. Exodus chapter 15.
Do you know what this is? Look at it again. It's a bone.
Exodus chapter 15, verse 16. Right? It says, Fear and dread shall fall upon them by the greatness of thine arm. They shall be as still as a stone, till thy people pass over, O Lord, till the people pass over which thou hast purchased. Alright, now look at Deuteronomy chapter 32. Deuteronomy 32, verse 6. Deuteronomy 32, 6. It says, Do ye thus requite the Lord, O foolish people and unwise? Is not he thy father that hath bought thee? Hath he not made thee and established thee? So you see, just kind of like back then, you know, when did God purchase them? I guess I should ask. So they were in Egypt, right? And he brings them out of Egypt, right? And they go through the Red Sea, and they're 1 Corinthians says they're baptized unto Moses, right? They became a nation. He says God brought them out, right? He brought them out. He purchased them, he bought them. Now, what happened with Israel? You had these individuals come in, they were involved in idolatry, Baal worship from the beginning, right? Pretty much from the beginning. So they reject God, reject him, and then we understand, eventually, and they reject the prophets. There's a silent period of silence, and then John the Baptist comes on the scene. Then Christ comes, right? And so then we understand for Israel in the book of Hebrews, Christ died for them, right, as a sacrifice and all of that. Okay, so now back to 2 Peter. Just kind of a recap there. All right, 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4. 2 Peter 2, 4. Says, For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly. And we talked about those two verses, remember, there a time ago. So, in 1 Peter, right? So, now it says, And turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them with an overthrow, making them an ensample unto those that after should live ungodly. Now here's where we were really going to spend some time, okay? It says, And delivered just Lot, vexed with the filthy conversation of the wicked, for that righteous man dwelling among them, and seeing and hearing, vexed his righteous soul from day to day with their unlawful deeds. Alright, so that's where we're going to spend most of the time. So notice, in verse 5, how many people were saved in the ark? 8, right? Noah, his wife, their 3 sons, and their 3 wives, right? 8 people. Now, does everybody know the story of Lot? Well, we're probably going to go ahead and read it just so we can get the context. But how many people were saved with Lot coming out of Sodom and Gomorrah? Does anybody remember? Lot, his wife, which some ends up happening to his wife. But Lot, his wife, and their 2 daughters. Right? So you got 8 from the flood. How many from Sodom and Gomorrah? 4. Right? So half of 8's 4. I thought that was interesting. Anyways, so verse 4 in 2 Peter 2 talks about the angels that sinned. Verse 5, Noah and his family, right? Verse 6 is Sodom and Gomorrah. Now notice, verse 7, and delivered just Lot. Now, we just said, according to Genesis, it was Lot and his 2 daughters, right? And his wife. So, when it says just Lot, it can't mean just Lot, like, right? So, just here has to mean something different, correct? Okay, so what does just mean here? And delivered just Lot. Lot was just. He was righteous, right? Does that make sense? So when it says here, and delivered just Lot, Lot was just. Okay? So we're going to...
It has to be that way because his actions were not just.
No, absolutely not.
It can't be describing his actions.
It has to be his standing.
It has to be.
So, different scenario, different dispensation. But how was Abraham justified? By faith. We're going to see where it doesn't say specifically where Lot was justified. But I think that it was when he follows Abraham. Because I think he believed what God was going to do with Abraham. Like Lot, it talks about Lot following him, Lot went with him.
That would go with Romans 4,
Yeah.
following the steps.
Exactly. That's when I think he was just. Okay. So let's look at Genesis. Like I said, we're going to read a lot. Sorry, Emily. Genesis chapter 12. Genesis chapter 12. And if anybody wants to read, they're more than welcome to. This is a lot. On the way to Genesis 12, get Acts chapter 7. Sorry about that. Acts chapter 7, Genesis chapter 12. All right, Acts chapter 7. This is where Stephen's in front of the council, the priests, right? Okay. He said, and it says, then said the high priest, are these things so? And he said, this is what Stephen said, men, brethren, and fathers, hearken, the God of glory appeared unto our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he dwelt in Charan, and said unto him, get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred, and come into the land which I shall show thee. Then came he out of the land of the Chaldeans and dwelt in Charan, and from thence, when his father was dead, he removed him into this land wherein ye now dwell. Right? So see, Stephen even recounts the same thing. God's going to tell Abraham to what? Get out of thy country, away from thy kindred, right? And why is that? Separate yourself from the identity that you had, because I'm going to give you a new identity, new standing, right? Does that make sense? So, now Genesis chapter 12, look at verse 1, Genesis 12, same thing. It says, now the Lord had said unto Abram, get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. Notice verse 4. So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. And Abram took Sarah his wife, and Lot his brother's son, all their substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran, and they went forth to go into the land of Canaan, and into the land of Canaan they came. Okay? So notice, when God tells Abram these things, he says, I'm going to make of you a great nation, I'll bless thee, I will bless him that bless thee, curse him that curseth thee. Right? So it says Abram departs, and then who goes with him? It's Lot, right? Lot goes with him. Now, no, verse 5 says that Abram took Sarah and Lot, but it says Lot went with him, and we're going to see another spot where Lot follows him. So here's where I believe Abram leaves, and Lot believes what God's going to do with Abram, so Lot goes with him. Okay? Now, look at Genesis 13. Genesis 13, verse 1. Does anybody want to read verses 1 through 13?
Sure, I will.
All right, thank you.
And Abram went up out of Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him, into the south. And Abraham was very rich in cattle, silver, and in gold. And he went on his journeys from the south, even to Bethel, unto the place where his tent had been at the beginning, even between Bethel and Ahai, unto the place of the altar which he had made there at the first. And there Abraham called on the name of the Lord, and Lot also, which went with Abraham, had flocks and herds and tents. And the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together, for their substance was great, so they could not dwell together. And there was a strife between the herdmen of Abraham's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle, and the Canaanite and the Perizzite dwell in the land. And Abraham said unto Lot, Let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, between my herdmen and thy herdmen, for we be brethren. Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, and I will go to the right, or if thou wilt depart to the right hand, I will go to the left. And Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest unto Zoar. Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves, and the one from the other. Abraham drew up the land of Canaan, and Lot drew up the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent toward Sodom. But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly.
All right, thank you. All right, so everybody see what's going on. So Abram and then everybody goes up out of Egypt. They're starting the journey again, right? And then they pitch somewhere, and Abram's got all this property, cattle, flocks, riches and all that. Lot the same, right? They have a great number. So now there's going to be some disagreements and some arguments and some fighting between the two because there's too many of them and there's not enough for everything for them to be supported. So notice it's interesting what Abram says to Lot in verse 8. At the end of the verse, what he says, "For we be brethren." Thought that was interesting. Was Lot Abram's brother? No. Lot was Abram's nephew. It's very interesting. And also, whose right to pick would it have been? Abram's. It was his right to pick the land. But what does Abram do? Abram allows Lot to pick. So what's Lot do? He looks out, he sees this land near the Jordan. It's nice, it's beautiful, it's rich, it's fertile. It looks just like, according to the Bible here, it says it's even as the garden of the Lord. So it must have been very nice. Right? So, but there was something else wrong with this picture. What was in this land? Sodom and Gomorrah. And they were wicked, wicked cities, and they were full of sinners. That's what it says. The men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. But Lot chose that land. right? So you're going to see how this is going to be. So why would Peter refer to Lot? He's talking about his righteous soul being vexed with the conversation of the wicked and all this stuff, right? Because why? What's going on during the tribulation? If you're suffering, okay, so if you're rich, you're not suffering, right? But if you're rich, what are you involved in? Apostasy. You're not following what God said, are
So
you?
it has to be possible.
It
for
had-
a little flock to
exactly.
mingle.
This is why I
But the
said
ungodly.
last week or the week before, this, to me, studying this out, this is one of the biggest proof texts for me that the little flock can be involved in this, and it's not about losing salvation, it's about losing reward. Okay? So, we're kind of not saying what we hear has been back and forth, but I would say this is a big topic throughout most grace churches and places. Is it about Israel losing their salvation or losing reward? I would say eternal security, they're eternally secure. Just like we're eternally secure, right? But what happens if they are involved in apostasy? We're going to see what happens with Lot at the end. Okay? They lose reward. Okay? Now, so notice, Lot looks over, it's pleasing to the eye, but what's in the land? Sodom and Gomorrah. Wicked, wicked, wicked cities, okay? And Lot still decides to pick that, okay? So just keep that in mind, all right? What's going on during this time? You got the little flock standing on the shoreward, suffering, being hunted down, not being able to buy or sell. What's on the flip side? If you're involved and mixed in with everybody doing what the Antichrist is promoting, probably you're not going to be suffering, right? So, now, Genesis chapter 18. Genesis chapter 18. It's another quite a bit of reading. We're going to start with verse 17. Genesis 18, verse 17. Would anybody like to read 17 through 33?
18.
Yeah, chapter 18, verses 17 through 33.
I got it.
Thank you.
And the Lord said, Shall I hide from Abraham that thing which I do, seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him? For I know him, that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord to do justice and judgment, that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he hath spoken of him. And the Lord said, Because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry of it, which is come unto me, and if not, I will know. And the men turned their faces from thence, and went toward Sodom. But Abraham stood yet before the Lord. And Abraham drew near and said, Wilt thou also destroy the righteous with the wicked? Peradventure there be filthy righteous within the city, 50 righteous within the city. Wilt thou also destroy and not spare the place for the 50 righteous that are near it? Then that be far from me to do after this manner, to slay the righteous with the wicked, and that the righteous should be as the wicked. That be far from thee. Shall not the judge of all the earth be right? What did you say? Go to the end of the chapter.
Yeah, if you
And the Lord said, If I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, then I will spare all the place for their sakes. And Abraham answered and said, Behold, now I have taken upon me to speak unto the Lord, which am but dust and ashes. Peradventure there shall lack 5 of the 50 righteous. Wilt thou destroy all the city for lack of 5? And he said, If I find there 40 and 5, I will not destroy it. And he spake unto him yet again, and said, Peradventure there shall be 40 found there. And he said, I will not do it for 40's sake. And he said unto him, O let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. Peradventure there shall 30 be found. And he said, I will not do it if I find 30 there. And he said, Behold, now I have taken upon me to speak unto the Lord. Peradventure there shall be 20 found there. And he said, I will not destroy it for 20's sake. And he said, Oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak yet this once. Peradventure 10 shall be found there. And he said, I will not destroy it for the 10's sake. And the Lord went his way as soon as he had left communion with Abraham, and Abraham returned unto his place.
Thank you. All right, so everybody see what's going on there? So, the beginning of the chapter, there's 3 men that appear at the tent, right? And we know one of those is the Lord, 2 angels. And so then, but when they leave there, they start walking towards Sodom and Gomorrah, right? So, it's interesting here because he says because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, because their sin is very grievous, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry of it. And then what does Abraham do? He sees what God's going to do. He says, well, if there's 50 righteous, will you spare the city? Then he starts negotiating. Why is that? Because he knows there's not 50 righteous, right? Notice, and it's very interesting. I think it's very, very interesting. He negotiates all the way down to 10. All the way down. How many was in Lot's household? 4. Well, the daughters had husbands, but they didn't believe it. So they end up laughing at Lot. But so 6 probably. Alright? So anyways, but so Abraham knows there's not 50 righteous, and that's why he negotiates all the way down with the Lord. The Lord's like, yeah, I'll spare it. And then he's like, well, 45. And he's like, yeah. And he's like, well, how about 40? How about 30? How about 20? And then how about 10? Right? So what's that tell you? There's not many righteous there. But he does know who is there. Lot, right? So now, chapter 19. I'm going to start with verse 1, okay? We'll kind of dissect it a little bit. It says, And there came 2 angels to Sodom at even, and Lot sat in the gate of Sodom. And Lot, seeing them, rose up to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. And he said, Behold now, my lords, turn in, I pray you, into your servant's house, and tarry all night, and wash your feet, and ye shall rise up early and go on your ways. And they said, Nay, but we will abide in the street all night. And he pressed upon them greatly, and they turned in unto him, and entered into his house, and he made them a feast, and did bake unleavened bread, and they did eat. But before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round, both old and young, all the people from every quarter. And they called unto Lot, and said unto him, Where are the men which came in to thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them. And Lot went out at the door unto them, and shut the door after him, and said, I pray you, brethren, do not so wickedly. Behold, now I have 2 daughters which have not known man. Let me, I pray you, bring them out unto you, and do ye to them as is good in your eyes. Only unto these men do nothing, for therefore came they under the shadow of my roof. So was Lot involved in the wickedness? Yes. Okay, let's try to just. So notice, number 1 in verse 7, what does he call these men? He refers to them as what? His brethren. Okay? He says, Brethren, do not so wickedly. And then he offers them his 2 daughters in place of the 2 men, right? So, Lot, and notice, Lot actually sat in the gate of the city. Alright? So, this just man, right, is involved in the wickedness that's going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. So just keep in mind, Peter using it as an example, that his righteous soul vexed with the wicked conversation, right? Over here, you got apostate, those that, what does James warn about in the first chapter of James? Not to be what? Double-minded, right? Don't be double-minded. Over here, don't be double-minded. Don't be like Lot. Don't be involved in everything, in the wickedness, the rampant wickedness. Don't be involved in the apostasy. It looks good, right? You're not going to be suffering, but it looks good. But we're going to see what's going to happen here. Okay, it says, verse 9, and they said, stand back. And they said again, this one fellow came in to sojourn, and he will needs be a judge. Now will we deal worse with thee than with them? And they pressed sore upon the man, even Lot, and came near to break the door. But the men put forth their hand and pulled Lot into the house to them and shut to the door. And they smote the men that were at the door of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves to find the door. Right? Verse 12 it says, and the men said unto Lot, hast thou here any besides, son-in-law, and thy sons, and thy daughters, and whatsoever thou hast in the city, bring them out of this place. For we will destroy this place, because the cry of them is waxing great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord hath sent us to destroy it. And Lot went out and spake unto his sons-in-law, which married his daughters, and said, up, get you out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this city. But he seemed as one that mocked unto his sons-in-law. So did they believe? No. Right? And when the morning arose, then the angels hastened Lot, saying, arise, take thy wife and thy 2 daughters, which are here, lest thou be consumed in the iniquity of the city. And while he lingered, the men laid hold upon his hand, and upon the hand of his wife, and upon the hand of his 2 daughters, the Lord being merciful unto him, and they brought him forth and set him without the city. So even after, catch that, even after they told him what was going to happen, what does verse 16 say Lot did? He lingered. He didn't want to leave. You see that? He was double-minded. You see that? That's the big thing Peter is portraying here. Okay? That's why he's using Lot as an example. All right? Later on in chapter 2, he's going to use Balaam. Balaam was greedy. And he, false. Balaam's used a lot. But here, Peter uses Lot as an example of somebody that is double-minded, that's not enduring, that's not standing on the sure word, but is involved in apostasy. That's a picture and type of a member of the little flock that is wavering, back and forth, back and forth. See that? So even with the angel standing there saying, the city is going to be destroyed, he still lingers. He's still holding on to the earthly stuff. What does Christ say in the Gospels? You cannot serve God and what? Mammon, right? You see that? It all goes together. It's very interesting. Alright, so notice verse 17. It says, and it came to pass when they had brought them forth abroad that he said, escape for thy life, look not behind thee, neither stay thou in all the plain, escape to the mountain, lest thou be consumed. And Lot said unto him, oh, not so, my Lord. Behold, now thy servant hath found grace in thy sight, and thou hast magnified thy mercy, which thou hast showed unto me in saving my life, and I cannot escape to the mountain, lest some evil take me and I die. Behold, now this city is near to flee unto, and it is a little one. Oh, let me escape thither. Is it not a little one? And my soul shall live. And he said unto him, see, I have accepted thee concerning this thing also, that I will not overthrow this city for the which thou hast spoken. Haste thee, escape thither, for I cannot do anything till thou be come thither. Therefore the name of the city was called Zor. The sun was risen upon the earth when Lot entered into Zor. So notice, he's staying his hand until Lot gets to the city, right? Alright? So now verse 24. Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven, And he overthrew those cities, and all the plain, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and that which grew upon the ground. Okay? Do you see that? So wrath comes upon the cities, right? And it devours everything. Overthrows the cities, the plain, the inhabitants, and everything that grows. Verse 26. But his wife looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham got up early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord, and he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and toward all the land of the plain, and beheld, and lo, the smoke of the country went up as the smoke of a furnace. And it came to pass, when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham, and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in the which Lot dwelt. Okay? We'll stop there for a second. Now, verse 26. So it talks about Lot's wife. It says she became a pillar of salt. Right? So me and John's been talking about that. So I always wondered about that verse because the common belief is that is a pillar of salt, like a mountain, a little mountain or pillar. And there's even one over there today that they say is her. I thought that was interesting. But I want to show everybody a verse. It's Deuteronomy chapter 29. So what was Lot doing prior to leaving the city when they told him to get out? He was lingering, right? And they actually get him out of the city. So remember, he was supposed to go to this other city before everything came down, and everything was devoured in the plain and everything. So she actually looks behind, right? And then she becomes a pillar of salt. So Deuteronomy chapter 29. Deuteronomy 29. Let's see, look at verse 21. Deuteronomy 29, verse 21 says, And the Lord shall separate unto him unto evil out of all the tribes of Israel, according to all the curses of the covenant that are written in this book of the law, so that the generation to come of your children that shall rise up after you, and the stranger that shall come from a far land shall say, when they see the plagues of that land, and the sicknesses which the Lord hath laid upon it, and that the whole land thereof is brimstone and salt. Everybody see that? So the wrath of God says, and that the whole land thereof is brimstone and salt, that it is not sown, nor beareth, nor any grass groweth therein, like the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah. And Admah is the bone which the Lord overthrew in his anger and in his wrath. So I would say, submit to you guys that she turns and she lingers and she's overtaken with the brimstone and the salt that God uses to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. So that's why a pillar of salt, the salt overtakes her, right? That's what I would say. She was consumed. So the things that I want to point out is you've got Lot, that's a picture of a member of the little flock that is double-minded, right? And then you've got Lot's wife, that's a type of a member of a little flock that is caught with the group when everything ends, pretty much. Not saying she loses her salvation, okay? But what happens? She dies, right? She dies. Alright, now got just a few minutes, so real quick, the end of Genesis chapter 19 now, look, verse 30. It says, And Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the mountain, and his 2 daughters with him, For he feared to dwell in Zoar, and he dwelt in a cave, he and his 2 daughters. Right. So notice, he asked to go dwell in that city, but then he's afraid to be there. So at the end of everything, what does Lot have?
You got a righteous man in a cave.
Righteous man in a cave. Nothing else. You see that? He's nothing. Him and his 2 daughters are in a cave. No possessions, no anything. So, you kind of see the type. So, a member of a little flock, double-minded, involved in apostasy, no reward. See that? Wrath comes. They're saved. Lot was saved, right? From the wrath of Sodom and Gomorrah. He was a just man. He was righteous, right? He was saved by faith at what was going on at the time, right? But he was left with nothing because why? He was involved in the wickedness of Sodom and Gomorrah instead of
The talent, parable of the talent.
right, exactly.
Outer darkness.
Yeah, cast out. Remember, we talked about that in the book of Mark and things about the talent, parable of the talents.
That's good.
So, back to 2 Peter. Verse 7 and 8 again. It says, and delivered just Lot. So you see, Lot was just. Vexed with the filthy conversation of the wicked, for that righteous man dwelling among them, and seeing and hearing, vexed his righteous soul from day to day with their unlawful deeds. Okay? So, the Lord knoweth how to deliver the godly out of temptations, and to reserve the unjust unto the day of judgment to be punished. We'll tackle that next week. But, so, everybody's seeing, Lot is the example Peter's using. Do not be double-minded. Don't vex your soul with the wicked conversation, the apostasy, the false teaching. Right? Real quick. Let me get my other notes here. Look at Matthew 24. Matthew 24. What's the false teachers teaching? They deny Jesus Christ, right? Deny he's the Messiah. That he was not the Messiah, he was just a good man. Or, so Matthew 24, look at verse 23. It says, then if any man shall say unto you, lo, here is Christ, or there, believe it not. For there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect. Behold, I have told you before. Wherefore, if they shall say unto you, behold, he is in the desert, go not forth. Behold, he is in the secret chambers, believe it not. You see that? So the false teachers, false prophets, preaching a false Christ, right? Saying he's here, he's there, trying to deceive, lead astray. Don't be double-minded. You have the sure word. Pretty much, Peter's, the context of 2 Peter, be grounded in the Word, right? Be grounded in the Word. Beware of the false teaching. Lot is the example of one that is not, that wavers, that's double-minded, that tries, that, goes back and forth. He's righteous, so don't get me wrong, he doesn't lose his salvation. He was righteous, but he's involved in the wickedness, therefore he loses his reward, or in the end. Which we see the type of that is he's in a cave with nothing, right? So has anybody got any questions or comments?
So I was looking at verse 1. Watch it very carefully. It says, but there were false prophets, referring to time past, also among the people, comma, even as there shall be future false prophets among you, comma, who privily shall bring in damnable heresies, comma, even denying the Lord that bought them, comma. bring unto themselves swift destruction. So that's the destruction, and then he uses all the examples.
Yeah.
So I think you're 100% on. There's this destruction that the little flock can possibly be caught in.
That's huge because, that's a big issue that most people have. How do you reconcile Israel with, do they lose their salvation? What's all this about enduring? Like what you taught in Hebrews, and even like with Mark, with the parable of the sower, what we talked about, even guys that I listen to a lot say that those three of those, all those guys except for the one are not saved. But that can't be the case. Can't be. So you see that just like us, by faith, we can choose to walk in our identity or not walk in our identity. Israel can choose to, endure, stand on the sure word of prophecy, or be double-minded. But at the end, it's risk of reward, and like with Lot's wife, what happens with Lot's wife? She's overtaken with the wrath.
So I guess my point is, not only is it possible for them to be involved in the heresies, according to that verse, what I take it is possible for them to actually propagate the heresies as well.
Be causing it. If you see also in verse 3, feigned words, they make merchandise of them.
Versus the unfinished words.
What's Balaam? He uses Balaam as an example of being greedy. Yeah. So teaching falsely, there could be gain in that in regards to the apostate system, money and possessions and things like that.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Okay.
But I appreciate it, everybody. Has anybody else got any comments?
Good teaching.
All right, we'll close this out. Lord, we thank you again for this day. Lord, thank you for everybody here. And most of all, thank you for your great grace. Lord, thank you for your word. And in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.